And our first presentation will be covering creating interactive Zabbix dashboards for large organizations and MSPs. And if you have any questions, please use the Q&A section. This is where it's a lot easier for us to see questions and answer them. And if you just want to network between yourself, leave a comment about maybe your experience with Zabbix, your thoughts on this meetup, or maybe you just want to tell us where you're from and how you're using Zabbix, feel free to use chat for that. So chat for networking and general comments, Q&A section for questions. So now let's begin. We'll talk about various different features. Some of them are new, some of them are maybe not so new, but they're lesser known. And the goal here is to sort of highlight different new and not so well-known things about Zabbix dashboards that can be useful for large organizations and MSPs in particular. We will begin with one of the newer features, the ability for widgets to broadcast and listen to data and how you can make interactive dashboards for your environment that way. So nowadays, widgets have broadcast and listen capabilities. We can broadcast hosts, host groups, time periods, items, events, and maps. And in our documentation page, we have over here a very nice list of different widgets and what they can be broadcasting. So this is a very nice cheat sheet that you can use in your environment when you're configuring dashboards. Over here, I have a QR code linking to the documentation page, so you can open it just manually, look up for widget broadcast or widget listen, and you'll find it. Or you can just follow the link below or scan the QR code on my screen. Like I said, very good cheat sheet where you're sort of designing your dashboards and trying to figure out how interactive they should be. So broadcast and listen capabilities allow us to deploy widgets configured in a way where they listen for data or they are used as data sources. They broadcast data to other widgets. For example, we can use Navigator widgets where we can select a host and information about that host will be displayed in this here example on graphs. Or in Item Navigator, we can select items and the data about corresponding items will be displayed on graphs, but it can be displayed also in other widgets. We can use not just these Navigator widgets, we can use also various non-Navigator widgets as broadcast widgets for our environment. Here we're using a GeoMap widget, and I have selected the host Linux server Tokyo, and the widget is actually broadcasting information, the selected host, to all of these item value widgets that you see on the left side. So they're actually displaying CPU load, memory information, swap space about the host I have selected on my GeoMap. So it's not just navigators that can be used for this. Various other widgets can be used for this, and that's why this table that I've shown you over here, right, is very useful. Here you can learn which widget can listen and which widget can broadcast. That way you can make highly interactive dashboards for your Zabbix environment. So we can also override data sources on the dashboard level. So we can, when we configure a widget, we can select that the host will be overridden by the dashboard. And then in the dashboard itself, in the top right corner, we are able to select the host, and widgets that are using dashboard as their override source will display information about these selected hosts. So here we're displaying values for Linux server New York. And of course, another design caveat here, we need to ensure that the items that we're displaying on our graphs exist on this host. Otherwise, we won't be seeing any data displayed on our widgets. That's another thing that you can consider and filter for. So we've introduced two new Navigator widgets. In Zabbix 7.0, we have Host Navigator, Item Navigator, and Map Navigation tree. Previously, we had only the Map Navigation tree. Now we have Host and Item Navigators also, and these can be used, and the goal for them is to serve as primarily as data sources for other widgets. And we can use these navigators and combine them together, link them to graphs, maps, item values, host cards. So whichever we select in the navigator will then be displayed in our item value widget, for example, or our host card widget, or some other widgets, once again, based on the table. When designing and deploying Navigator widgets, so you can see they have these various categories, right? Grouping. And this is something, once again, that we have to consider because we can over here group by tag values, by host groups, by problem severities, and various other host attributes. And next to this group, right, we can also see the number of problems on the hosts within that group. So if you wish to have a very nicely organized Navigator widget, you also need to properly tag your hosts and group them. Once again, that depends on what kind of design you want to go with, mostly group by tags or maybe group by host groups or some other grouping. But that's something that you have to consider when you're deploying these Navigator widgets. Over here, I have grouped by different locations: Los Angeles, New York, Porto Alegre, San Francisco, and Tokyo. For an item that does not exist on the selected host, we will be seeing, either in case of graphs, an empty graph, or in case of widgets, we'll be seeing an error message, no permission to referred object, or it does not exist. So I have selected load average item on Apache server, and such an item does not exist on my Apache server. Therefore, I'm getting empty widgets. So this is something that you maybe want to configure in your broadcast, or maybe Navigator in particular, widget filters, that you only have the selection of hosts and items that can actually be displayed. So the combination that exists. Otherwise, if you have maybe a NOC team that is using Zabbix, they might be very much confused by, why am I seeing no data? Is the item broken? Is something wrong with the CPU load average? You want to avoid these situations. So that's why grouping and filtering can play a quite important role for just general look and feel and UX of your Zabbix instance. So this is how we make our widgets interactive. But one of my favorite feature in Zabbix dashboards, and one of my favorite widgets with a favorite set of features on Zabbix dashboards, and a widget that I use quite a lot, is the graph widget. It has a lot of different configuration settings. It can be very highly customizable. And we'll talk about a couple of sort of tricks that you can use to get the most out of it. So the graph widget, as you probably already know if you're using Zabbix, allows you to display values in SVG vector graphs. And it uses item and host patterns to match data, right? And this is also very powerful. Instead of selecting hosts directly, which we can do, we can use these wildcard patterns. So here I'm matching incoming and outgoing traffic on all of my containers, no matter what their names are. I can add new containers, remove containers, and all of that will be instantly reflected on the graph. So that's extremely powerful. It makes them very dynamic. This widget also supports various draw styles and visualization options. And we can also aggregate data directly in the graph, which is a very powerful feature, I think. So the graphs are based on data sets. In data sets, we can use item patterns, or we can use item lists, right? So I can either use the pattern, so display incoming traffic for all of my containers, or an item list where I have selected individual containers for which I wish to see the outgoing traffic, right? So first one is a bit more flexible. Second one is more strict. Both of these data set types can be linked to override host, so we can display item values for a host selected from for example, from a Navigator widget or any other broadcast widget. Trigger thresholds can also be displayed on this graph. So it's not just classical graphs that can display trigger thresholds. The dashboard SVG graphs can also display trigger thresholds, but just for simple triggers. A simple trigger is a trigger that uses one of these functions, either last, max, min, or average. And it can also do this for only one item, the first item in the expression. So if you have multiple items, the threshold will be displayed only for the first one. But there it is. And we can also display problems. And you can see, right, whenever the threshold was exceeded, we had a problem for this time period, and it's displayed on the graph. So that's an additional layer of information. This is somewhat hidden in the graph configuration. That's why I'm emphasizing it here. This is the way how you can get extra information out of your graph widgets. Overrides is also an extremely scary section, but it's quite simple. So you have a data set, and within that data set, you wish to override maybe one individual item. You wish to display it in a different way. In this case, it's CPU utilization on Linux server Los Angeles, and I want to have a different draw style and a different color for it. So I'm overriding it. I'm highlighting this particular item. I've changed its draw style, but I can also change its color, how missing data is displayed, time shift for it, y-axis display, and more. This is useful if you have that one outlier that you wish to display differently. Aggregation is by far my favorite feature of these graphs. So instead of creating separate items, separate calculated items to aggregate our data, we can actually aggregate data directly in the graph configuration itself. We can get minimum, maximum, average, sum, count, and other aggregations. We can aggregate either each individual item or across the whole data set. Here I'm on the right side on the screenshot, I'm aggregating a data set. Um, I'm aggregating all of my incoming traffic on Linux servers, and I'm doing a sum over the last 5 minutes, and I'm getting the total traffic, incoming traffic on my Linux servers with 5-minute interval aggregations over here. So that's extremely powerful, native within the graph. No need to configure a separate item or anything like that. Time shift, a bit tricky, maybe a bit scary, but it's very useful if you wish to compare data. So we can display older data, so in this case, data from 24 hours ago on our graph. And this is useful for comparing. So I'm displaying CPU utilization on my Linux servers in a blue line and CPU utilization on my Linux servers 24 hours ago in a red line. And that way I can compare today's CPU utilization with yesterday's CPU utilization. And once again, look for outliers, look for anomalies that way on my graphs. Let me quickly check if there are any comments in the chat. Let's see, just some general discussion. So someone's asking, as we're expanding the broadcast and listen capabilities for each widget, will the final version of this will be included in 7.0 or in later major version update 7.2, 7.4? So we'll continue expanding this. We'll continue also adding new widgets over time, and such major improvements usually are included in major releases. So 7.2 is already out. We'll have more in potentially 7.4 and 8.0 down the line. Look at the roadmap to see more details. But we'll continue expanding this in major releases mostly because such major changes as new widgets are usually introduced in major releases, not in minor updates to LTS versions. All right. Okay, 1 second. Let me see if there's anything quickly, just looking at the Q&A. So all of the data that is displayed in the graphs is stored in Zabbix database, either historical or trend tables. Okay, and I'll answer, either my colleagues or me will answer the question afterwards. Just want to take a short break from just going through the slides. Maybe there's something that you want to see answered ASAP. So another nice feature for graph widgets is how we play with missing data. How do we want to display it? And there are 4 settings here. We can do not display the missing values. We can treat them as a 0, connect the last known value with the current value, and treat missing values as last known values. As you can see over here, 2 examples. Do not display missing value where we have a gap for the missing value, and connect last known value with the current value where that gap is filled with a connection, right? You can see that over here. So once again, we can choose how we display our data. Another very powerful feature for various Zabbix widgets is defining thresholds for them. And I will just display how thresholds can be used in various Zabbix widgets. And this can be used, these thresholds can be used to at a glance see when there is a problem for a particular item, for a particular metric in your environment. We can look at resources, we can look at services that way, and just quickly, for example, our NOC team, right? Their job is to sort of constantly keep an eye out on our dashboards, and they see that a widget is lighting up in red, so they instantly know that there is a problem. And we can do this for numeric data. For example, for item value, we can highlight the item value widget in case if a threshold is reached, right? Reaching and exceeding a threshold changes the background color of the widget. So over here we have, right, everything over 30, let's say maybe it's for available memory percentage or something like that. Everything over 30 is green, from 20 to 30 orange, from 10 to 20 red, and from 0 to 10 a darker shade of red, right? And we can see available memories highlighted in orange, it's at 29%, and customer portal availability is highlighted in red, has a separate set of thresholds for it because it's down. So very quickly, someone can notice that something is wrong. The same logic can be applied to gauges with a more sort of informed view because we have these value arcs, right? And we can see gauges changing color depending on CPU utilization and available memory thresholds. Top hosts and item lists, right, where we can display a list of items or a list of hosts with their items. We can define individual thresholds for each column over here. And this, since we get a list of hosts and their items in these widgets, this can give us a sort of larger scale overview of the general state of our environment, right? So here I can see memory utilization on all of my hosts is relatively high. It's not super high, but it's at 70-ish%. So maybe all of them are overloaded due to just busy time in my environment, and I should see if they go even higher over time. Just keep an eye out on them. Honeycomb widget, visualization-wise, is maybe even a bit more advanced because here we can not just only define thresholds, but we can enable color interpolation. And in this case, the individual cell can change its color, for example, slowly from green to yellow, from yellow to red, from yellow to orange, from orange to red, and it will do so gradually, right? And it will interpolate between these colors. And this just once again gives us a better overview of our environment at a scale. Here I'm looking at container memory usage from the looks of it. Some particular features that are useful for MSPs and that MSPs have to remember. So first off, our dashboards can be private or public. Public dashboards are available in read-only mode to every user. Private dashboards are not visible to users by default, and we need to add read or write permissions to individual users or user groups. So when defining dashboards for clients, they should probably be set to private. But maybe you also want to have some public dashboards for your customers that are visible to everyone. These thresholds can be used only for numeric values, at least currently. So regarding dashboard sharing, so we need to select sharing options. We need to click on the burger menu on the top right, then click sharing, and there we can define is the dashboard private or public. In this case, looks like it's public, and then we have, oh no, it's private, and we have assigned the customer ABC can access it. Only public dashboards and private dashboards with assigned permissions will be visible to our user if they're not a super admin user, right? So I've logged in as a customer. I can see my own dashboard in this Zabbix instance and just general global statistics that MSP has allowed for all of the customers to view. And remember that only the hosts to which the user has at least read-only access will be visible to the dashboards, will be visible on the dashboards. So I need to have at least read-only permissions on a host, otherwise I won't be seeing it on a dashboard. We can also restrict access to widgets. We can improve our user experience if we, for example, there are some custom widgets in our environment, community widgets that only our admins use and other users don't need to even have access to them. So we can limit a list of widgets that our users can use to create their dashboards. And we can restrict it system-wide under general modules in administration general modules settings. We can also restrict it on a role level. The restricted widgets will be displayed as no permissions to referred objects or it does not exist. So we have opened a dashboard with restricted widget on it. This is how it's going to be displayed. So don't get confused by it. Once again, it's the same error message, by the way, if we have selected, for example, a host for which an item does not exist by using broadcast widgets. So this can be a bit confusing. You might have to figure out why you're getting this error message. Is it restricted permissions to widgets, where you have selected some item or a host, you're trying to broadcast it, but it doesn't exist on a particular host, for example. Users, once again, something, if you have onboarding or offboarding procedures, you're creating, deploying new customers in your environment as an MSP, and you're trying to delete a dashboard, users or delete a user, users that are configured as dashboard owners, you will not be able to delete them. So first you'll have to delete the dashboard and then delete the user. So either change the owner of the dashboard or delete that dashboard, and only then you'll be able to delete the user, right? So something if you're an MSP, you probably have this onboarding, offboarding procedure scripted. So once again, something to take into account in your API scripts. First, change the dashboard ownership or delete the dashboard, and then delete the user. And some final tips and tricks. So we have a dashboard get API method, and this can be used to retrieve a dashboard, but only for backup purposes. So it's not a full-fledged dashboard export. You will not be able to move your dashboards between environments this way. Why? Because they refer to IDs. They refer to hosts by their IDs, and in a different environment, your host will have different IDs, most likely. So if you have two duplicate environments, sure, you can move dashboards between them. But if they differ, then this is useless for moving the dashboard between Zabbix instances. But it's useful for backing up a dashboard. Remember, we have a kiosk mode button on the top right of our dashboards, right? So if we want to display our Zabbix without any interface elements, interface configuration elements, and a full screen for our NOC team, there's the useful kiosk mode button, top right corner of our dashboards. We can also have multi-page dashboards, and in that case, we can run them in a slideshow mode where they will change between pages, and we can configure each page display period. Once again, useful for our NOC team, so they have to click through dashboards. They can just sit back, and dashboards are just cycling in the background. We have our widgets configured with thresholds, and they'll instantly and quickly see when there is an issue somewhere. So, and that's it from me. Just some general tips and tricks and focus on permissions, graphs, broadcast, and listen widgets. I hope you enjoyed this. This is quite a simple, I think, presentation, repeating some maybe lesser known things and focusing on new features, but hopefully it gave you some ideas how these features can be used in your environment. I'm going to take a look at the questions. So we have a request for host navigator widget to be able to broadcast host groups or data from multiple hosts. So these requests should be the ideal place for them is our bug tracker where you can create, so support.zabbix.com. You'll be able to create a feature request there. And maybe such a feature request already exists. I'm not sure, but look it up. If it doesn't exist, create it. And if it gets enough traction or if it's maybe simple enough for us to implement and it makes sense for us, we will gladly implement it. Is it possible to show a status page in Zabbix? As MSP, our customer may want to know the availability of our services or incoming maintenance. So status, I guess, if we're talking about hosts, then nowadays we have a host card widget where you can display information about a host on a dashboard. So if we're talking about hosts, their statuses can be displayed on the dashboard. If we're talking about some just general services, we could use business service monitoring and maybe then combine it with SLA widget and display that on the dashboard, and then they'll be able to see the SLA status of an individual service. More than likely, yeah, you could use this business service monitoring and just give them access to the business service sections. Or create an item in Zabbix, right? Maybe a Zabbix Trapper item that uses a script to report the status of your infrastructure, and then an item value widget linked to that Zabbix Trapper item on your dashboard. Is it possible to add a specific threshold on the graph widget instead of a simple trigger? No, threshold-wise, it can refer only to triggers currently. How can we deploy Zabbix using Docker container? We will talk about this in the next presentation. Yeah, about backup, dashboard backup. Are there plans to implement a full backup restore for all modules? So if you're talking about modules, modules already can be backed up. If you're talking about dashboards, then can't confirm or deny, but we are aware of that request. And I think in one of our on-site conferences, our CEO also mentioned that he's aware of the request. These slides will be sent to you guys within the next week, and the recording will also be available online. They'll be sent via email. Okay. Alarm notifications. Front-end notifications are available in Zabbix. Yes, you can have front-end alarms in Zabbix for each user with custom sounds and durations and so on.